Hi there, it's Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, the Women's Broadcast TV Network, WomenOnTV.tv, and IT247 out of Franklin, Tennessee. So, obviously, it's not Saturday today, but it is Sunday, but it doesn't matter because it's all about when we march. So, I marched with the New London Surfers, Sword Excalibur in the early 70s, right up until almost the late 70s. And then we disbanded. Everybody went to the 27th Lancers, Madison Scouts, North Star, and the Bridgemen. So our guest today is who? Who are you and where did you come from and who did you march with?
Okay, my name is J. Frank Nash. I started very young in the activity. I was 6 years old. I started in a small parade corps in Brooklyn that was connected to the Loyal Order of Oddfellows. I then went to the Wind Center Toppers where I marched for 3 years. I then went to St. Joseph Patron Cadets, also in Brooklyn. I was there. The Corps became the St. Rita's Brassmen in 1969. We changed to a different church. And I was there until 1972, at which time I became a member of the New York Skyliners, Senior Drum and Bugle Corps. I was there from 73 to 84. I then became a member of the Bushwhackers Drum and Bugle Corps. I was there from 1985 to 93. I then was part of the Caballeros organization, the Hawthorne Caballeros, from 94 through 99, and I aged out in 2000 with the Syracuse Brigadiers.
Well, wait a minute.
Mind you,
you actually aged out. What year did you age out?
Mind you, it is within 2000. I was 48 at the time. It's an inside joke.
That's funny. That's hilarious because I always tell people, yeah, you can march to the drum corps until you're 86 if you wanted to, you know, and that's true, right?
Well, you can. You can. But that was the last year I marched on the field competitively. I marched in the Sky Alumni Drum Corps in 2007 through 2009. But other than that, you know, that was the last time I marched competitively. So I called it my age out.
You know what's funny about that is that's been your whole life. That's incredible. Age 6?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Pretty much.
Wow.
I'll be 68 next month.
Wow. Let's talk about this. For these people that haven't marched in the drum corps, what did that do for you? How did that shape your life?
Oh boy. In many ways, the biggest thing obviously is, you know, the old saying about idle hands being the work of the devil. Well, I never had idle hands. I was always involved in something. That was the way I was brought up. Most, you know, the young people in my family, you had to be involved in something. They weren't going to have you sitting around, you know. So drum corps was my thing, you know, and I loved it from the time I was a little kid, and I still love it today.
Talk about, let's go here. So St. Rita's Brassmen, I never got a chance to see them. I knew they were always good, and I'll tell you why I didn't get a chance to see them. Because when we went with the Surfers in London to the World Open, there were, you know, you remember they had 2 days of prelims to see who would make finals.
Yes.
So at that point,
right.
The tours that always went on, and I was like, oh, I missed them. And then you're like, well, you know, you never knew who you're going to be in a show with or when you could see them again. And
right.
I don't think you guys did a lot of shows depending where you were traveling. And that was half the battle. But I just knew you guys were good.
Well, you know, with so many corps around at the time, you had different circuits as well as the open, you know, class. A lot of our shows at the time, I'd say, you know, in Jersey, upstate New York. We came to Connecticut a few times. One thing, we were one of the first corps to kind of go on a tour, so to speak. In '69, we went out to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Wow.
And that was pretty cool.
What was that like?
You know, oh, that was great. It was nice to see something different, you know, and see some of the corps that we had only heard about. Like, say, for instance, I think that might have been the first time I saw the Kilties in person. Trying to remember. There were a couple other corps, you know, but it was cool. It was a nice trip.
You know what's funny about that?
And of course, it was very
And
different.
I always loved the Lancers when they wore their kilts. That's what made me in an obvious idol, Roddy Piper from from wrestling. It made me go to Scotland to get a kilt. but it really
okay.
to the kilt. That would have been my third corps that I would love to have marching because of that. And I always thought they were tough.
They were. I tell people, I remember them getting off the bus, and I thought it was a college football team. There was some big guys in there. But it was really cool. And we kind of did, I don't know if I call it a loop, but we went out there. We came back in time for the World Open. And we didn't do the CYO that year. We did the CYO the following year. But it was nice. It was really cool. And obviously, it's a lot different than the touring model today. Didn't cost us near as much individually.
What was that like going from when you were in the junior corps? When did you get out of the junior and then go into the senior?
I started in 1973. I went to the New York Skyliners.
Wow, that's interesting. You went in their good years. Wow. What was that like when you went to that senior? Yeah. How old were you? Do you remember?
I was 21 that year. So my last year of junior eligibility, I ended up marching in senior corps. It was a different atmosphere, but it's funny. The instructors we had in St. Rita's and St. Joe's were Skyliner people. We had Hyde Dreitzer, Eric Perilou, Carmen Cluna. They were all from New York Skyliners. So, it was kind of like I knew where I was going at some point.
What instrument did you play?
I'm a snare drummer.
Okay. Were you always a snare drummer, or did you start as a cymbal player and work your way up?
Well, I started, to tell you a little story. In the first drum corps I was in, I was only 6 at the time. They wanted to put me on cymbals. I didn't want to play cymbals. I wanted to play snare drum. And I probably acted like a typical 6-year-old. And the instructor told my grandparents, who I lived with at the time, he said, well, I tell you what I'm going to do. If he's willing to practice every day, I'll give him an opportunity. And that's how things got started with me. As a 6-year-old, I'd come home from school, whatever, and I'd practice my mama, daddies, and paradiddles and things. I would practice every single day because I wanted it. I really wanted it bad. And when I was 10, I got hit by a car, and that slowed me down a little bit for that year. And then the following year, I joined the Wind Center Toppers, and I played tenor drum there. So it was kind of like, plus the talent level of the guys in that corps was a little stronger, and I wasn't up to that yet, but it was great. It was a great experience. The Wind Center Toppers were very well known in my part of Brooklyn there, and it was really cool, especially after Brooklyn Day, going back to school, and people in your class saw you in a parade like that, and we used to get special notes to get out of school to march in the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City. So it was cool. It was kind of prestigious, but it was a very cool experience. And, in talking about what drum corps did for me, like I said, it kept me occupied, kept me from getting involved in some things other people got involved in. That and my mother was going to kill me if I did anyway, but but being in the drum corps, while some of my friends were doing knucklehead things, I was at rehearsal.
Exactly.
Getting better.
Talk about when you went to that senior corps, were you one of the youngest members at that point?
Pretty much. The following year, there were a couple of people quite a bit younger, but nowadays it's called all age because there's no such thing really as senior corps anymore. When I got into senior corps back in '73, most of the people were over 21. You might have a few people younger, but most were over 21. Now most are under. You know, the demographic has changed quite a bit.
That's interesting. Why do you think that changed like that? Because I always thought
Well,
you had to be 21 to get into, at that point, the senior core, because most people wanted to age out. But I'm finding, depending if you were in that areas of Massachusetts, that no, you were going directly to a senior core. That's fascinating to me. I didn't know that, being from Connecticut.
yeah, I mean, and like say, you know, the general rule is they wanted people who were 21 and over. But, you know, like I said, you would find a few people that were younger, and some of the cores, like the Sunrises at the time, they had quite a few people that were under 21, but it was just the way things worked out. But, you know, back in those days, people, you know, they went through the junior core situation, they'd go to a senior core and stay for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. You know, that kind of started changing a bit. I'd say in the mid to late 80s, early 90s, you know, when you started getting some more younger people coming in, and they might stay a year or two and then go to DCI if they still had some time left. And sometimes they'd come back. But the whole senior core activity started getting a little younger. So I want to say in the early 2000s when they changed it to all age, if I'm not mistaken, or just before then. So they gave it that designation. So also there was a weird, how to say, there was some things that were thought of senior core, like, you know, all they wanted to do is drink and party and that type of thing. When, while you had leeway to do that, most people that did it, you know, they were serious about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And some cores were known for their party and stuff like that. But,
Like
you know,
who?
well, actually, Sky gave some of the best parties ever in history. You know, but when it came down to wanting to achieve, well, some of that fun had to go to the wayside.
Right.
You know, and that's, you know, and different cores had different methods, of course, on how they did things. Like when I went to the Bushwhackers, there was a lot of ex-bridgemen in that core, stuff like that. And it was a very different, I would say about 5 to 10 years older than most of the people in the core when I went there. But it was, they were very, very gung-ho 100% of the time. You know, it was a very intense situation, and it was very cool, very cool. And the Corps was quite successful during that time.
Talk about when you went to the Caballeros, you said, right? What was that like? Because I always loved
Yeah.
to watch it. I'll just never forget. They were the first corps that I looked at when they would come to Connecticut, because we always had the New London Surface always had the first show of the year,
Right.
and it was always Memorial Day weekend. And I just remember they always looked older, no matter what.
Who, the Muchachos?
Corps.
You know, I think it's funny. When I think back to that time, I think we dressed a little older. We looked a little older. Like I look at some pictures from the 50s, and you had 18 and 19-year-olds that looked like what you might think a 30-year-old looks like today. You know, that was at least my impression of it. When I went to the Cabs, it was a very interesting experience. You know, it was actually the first year I didn't march. I just taught that year in '94. Prior to that, whatever teaching I did it from in the line. You know, and there was, like when I was at Bush, there was a few of us that marched in the line. Because with senior corps, sometimes you needed somebody to fill a spot, and sometimes staff would, you know, have to fill a spot. I always, you know, I loved to march. I loved to play. When I went to the Cabs, I had marched 30 years straight from 63 to 93. So
That's
I kind of,
incredible.
you know, wanted to take, you know, do it a little differently. And then I ended up marching in 97. I also marched in 98, which year I became the caption head and the ranger. And 99, I played in the pit.
Was that when you went to the pit, was that more because they were doing more movements on the field, maybe? Or you just wanted to?
Not at all. Not at all. I stayed in shape. You know, I was into bodybuilding also. That was my alternate, hobby. It was just when I became caption head, I wanted to have the opportunity to not have to be out on the field all the time.
That makes sense.
You know,
makes sense.
So
who was for Caballeros
so
and Skyliners? Who was their rivals? The two corps that were always the rivals that they made.
Funny you mentioned that.
Along with, would you say?
Well, you know, how would I put it? On the way onto the field, you hated everybody. And then after the show was over in the parking lot, everybody hung out.
Okay.
You know, there was some rivalries. The Caballeros and Skyliners rivalry goes back to 1946. You know, they both started around the same time. There were, and then other corps had come up, and there were rivalries between, like in DCA, everybody was your rival. But like I said, after the shows, it was one big, group.
That's funny.
Yeah.
The first summer when you 1946 when you say you aged out, what was that summer of not marching for you?
Well, actually, like I said, I didn't march in 94.
Okay.
And that was that was after my 30 years straight of marching. It was different, but it was needed. It was time for me to, kind of have a different focus, so to speak.
What did you do? Because
I was a snare tech.
Huh?
I was a snare tech with the Caballeros that year. So I got out in the field and chased them around.
Right.
So I didn't march.
What I really mean by that is, what was the year that you didn't march drum corps at all?
Okay, so let's see. After that year, I called my age out in 2000.
Right.
I taught a Division III DCI corps for 3 years.
Okay.
So I actually never stopped. The 1 year I didn't do anything was 2006.
What was that? That's what I want to know. What was that like, not being around the drum corps world and not marching?
I went to shows, I was still around it, but I kind of, it's hard to say. It wasn't too crazy, because once I figured out I wasn't going to die from not being a drum corps, I was all right.
That's funny. Well, the reason I asked, because that's funny, is that in 1979 was the year I didn't march, and it was my worst summer till this day ever. I had nothing to do because I looked at it this way. I didn't want to go to Massachusetts to be with 27th. I didn't want to, because that's where 4 of our snare drummers went. They were center snares. Scott Standard, Jimmy Perro, Perez, all those people were there. And then, my friend Mary went from Fire S, so she was the first female snare drummer there.
I know Mary.
Yeah. Sticks with sticks. And then so what happened with all of that was Woody, I've got what Woody's last name. He went to Bridgman. So he was there. He was the smallest guy, but a good snare drummer. And then one of our baritone players, Lance Proctor, he went to North Star. And then Clarence CJ went to Madison Scouts. So
yes, I know. I know CJ. God rest his soul. I know him as well.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So I didn't want to go to those states. I almost went to Wisconsin to Madison, but I didn't want to do the winters, if that made sense. Because I was going to go there, I was going to be committed to be there. So I'm going to California, 1, for the radio market, which was a major thing, number 2 market, but I wanted to go to Walnut Creek to be near Santa Clara. So at the Los Angeles and UCLA, I never made it up to Northern California. I was down in Los Angeles.
Right, right.
So I would see the first Southern shows before everybody started going out, like right after July 4th or July 7th, you know? And
Well, I'll tell you a little story about 2006. Uh, I got married in 1978. And, you know, all of those years I was in drum corps year after year. And it was interesting. 2005, I was back with the Caballeros. I worked as a snare tech with them that year. And then in 2006, I gave my wife that year. You know, she deserved more than that, but you know, I gave her that year, and I was, you know, so I didn't do any drum corps that year, and it wasn't bad. Although I ended up doing Sky Alumni the following year because it was a much lighter schedule than, you know, the normal. I did like I said, did the alumni thing for a couple of years, and it was fun. I mean, around a bunch of old friends. You
you
know,
were able
so
to adjust no matter what. That's good. I didn't. I felt cheated because the servers, you know, I mean, that was, you know, Sword Excalibur. That 78 was the last year. They had
uh,
one more year, 78, but it wasn't the same. It was just small, really small.
okay,
They had 50 members at that point. Um,
okay,
but with that, at that point, there was actually they had 2 more years later. But it was one of those things where I wanted to go to California once I graduated, and it was 5 years later. And I
uh,
knew that's where I was going to be. And so if I had gone to Massachusetts, my whole world would have changed. I didn't want to end up in Massachusetts. I was tired of
right,
everything on the East Coast, if that made sense. So I was
right,
out West. So that's why I say that. So that year of 1979 for me, I should have learned to play golf. But, you know, being in Connecticut, you know, it was an all-white town. What's the chances of a black guy learning how to play golf? You know, that was
yeah,
so there was the most boring year that I had. So I went to all the shows that I could on the East Coast, and then there was no way I was going to go to Alabama for finals. I
right, right,
knew, but there was no way I was going to go, especially kind of by myself to Alabama of all places. You know,
yeah, yeah,
that's like, you know.
yeah.
So, so that was my worst summer because I didn't know what to do. And I said, this is not going to happen again. I'm not going to go through this again. So I was never able to march again because it was just the distance of everything. And then I was graduating in 1980. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have to learn to just to do shows. What I should have probably have done was maybe have gone to the Connecticut classes, but my car wasn't going to make the travel. And that was
Mm.
the other issue, you know?
Well, you know, things happen for a reason. You know, I mean, I guess, like with me, the convenience of doing drum corps was always there, I guess. And, you know, like I said, I always loved it. That was my hobby. You know, that's, you know, I say all of my long-standing friendships, I say 99% of them are from drum corps. I met my
Yeah.
wife through drum corps. I mean, it's been my whole life. It's been my whole life, and I've been very fortunate to be around some really great people and have some really great experiences. I've been part of 9 DCA World Championships.
Wow.
I won 3 snare drumming INEs in DCA, and 7 drum titles.
Oh, that's impressive. What was that like when you won the first one? Who was that with?
The first DCA championship
Yeah.
was with the New York Skyliners in 1975, and it was unbelievable. It was great. I mean, it was, you know, because I always looked up to that corps, and you know, and I knew, like I said, I knew I'd end up being there someday, and I got to experience what my instructors had experienced. So it was very cool. My next DCA championship was something that if you were to write a book about it, people might not believe it. It was an amazing experience. I was with the Bushwhackers in 1986. We won DCA finals. It was the first competition that the Corps ever won.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an amazing
How did
experience.
that happen?
Well, I mean, we were in the running all year. We were undefeated in percussion, and we were in there. But up until that point, no one had ever lost prelims and won finals. Well, 2 corps in front of us tied in prelims. And, and that night we went out just to show what we had. It was, it wasn't about winning, losing. It wasn't about where we placed. It wasn't about anything but going out and showing the world what we had. And it turned out very well, and we ended up winning.
That's incredible. You guys must have had a big party after that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh yeah. That was great. And, 6 of my titles I won with the Bushwhackers between 1986 and 93. Then, like I said, I went to the Caballeros. I won a championship with them in 95. And then my age out year again in 2000 with the Syracuse Brigadiers was the final one.
Huh. If you had the choice to march with any junior corps, who would that have been and why?
Oh boy, that's a very tough question because I was a big fan of the cadets. I definitely, if I was young enough, would have tried to come out and do the Blue Devils in '77.
Oh wow, yeah.
But by that time I was already 5 years, over age, so it was, unfortunate. I tell you, the Chicago Cavaliers, the first time I ever saw them was at the 1966 Dream Competition. And that day it was star-studded, so to speak. You had Blessed Sacrament, you had the Troopers, the Royal Airs, and I loved all of those corps, but there was something about the Cavaliers that struck me, and it set me off. Everything about drum corps at that point for me went into high gear or a higher gear.
Who won that 66 show?
66 Dream was won by the Blessed Sacrament Golden Knights.
So I never got a chance to see Blessed Sac or the Royal Airs.
Yeah.
And just an age thing.
Yeah, the Royal Airs actually, I think 68 was their last year. Blessed Sacrament was around until 73, if I'm not mistaken. But you just didn't go to the same shows. That's just how it worked out.
Right.
Now, were the Surfers in a circuit?
They were in the Northeastern Circuit, yeah.
Right. Okay, so most years...
They won it 4 years in a row, so 72, 73, 74.
Okay.
They won it 3 years in a row, 72, 73, 74.
Right. So most of your shows were within the circuit.
Yeah.
Where, like, say, our shows were all open. Now, we were... when I started out, it was in the Great New York Circuit with Wynn Center. St. Joseph Patron was also in the Great New York Circuit. In '67, the year I went there, they went open. So they weren't in any circuit. It was just open competition. So, it was a little bit, you saw different corps. And, back then, there was just so many drum corps in the country. And it's something that, a lot of people, talk about. The neighborhood drum corps is gone. And, some people think DCI had a lot to do with that. I personally don't subscribe to that because you had churches, you had PALs, Boys and Girls Clubs, VFW, and American Legions that got out of it.
Right.
They stopped sponsoring drum corps. So that kind of took away the whole neighborhood aspect of it to a degree. The other thing was, I guess, looking at DCI, because towards the end of the 70s, I guess, would have been when people started traveling across the country to go different places. Some went before that, but it got more prevalent as it got towards the end there.
Yeah, our first year was going cross country was 77. We didn't have the corps wasn't the same after the 74 show. That was it for a lot of people. Some of them were aging out. Some of them had just got, they had been there for 3-5 years,
Yeah.
There's that sports team. You're only going to have a good sports team for really 3 years. You're lucky if you can have 4. 5, that's called really just lucky. It's not going to happen. If you look at all the corps and what years they were good,
But but there's certain groups that maintain a certain level of excellence. I mean, like especially in talking about that time in the late '60s, early '70s, or whatever. Troopers, Bless the Sacrament, uh, uh, Cavaliers. I'm trying to think of a couple other ones. They
Maybe
were
the Kilties
always
at that point in the 60s.
guilties as well. Yes, I put them in there. But they were always at the top echelon of competition. And you had corps like St. Joseph Batavia that were real strong. And, like they lasted, like you said, for 4 or 5 years, but corps like Cavaliers almost every year for years. And then when DCI started, they kind of took a step back a little bit for some time. And then in the early 90s, they came back again.
Yeah. I love the Cavaliers. I love those shows. That turned me on. And then I'll never forget sitting up there for like 3 quarters. I was talking to Don Warren, just he and I. I'll never get that. That was just an honor for that.
Yeah.
And then I called him because he wanted to get on Oprah's show, and I was doing what I could from California to make that happen. And I never forgot that. It was just an honor to talk to some of those people like that,
Yeah.
One of those things where, in my field of promoting movies and TV shows, of talking to all the celebrities, I wanted them all to know what drum corps was all about. Because as you know, remember in the 70s, you would see, the guest people coming on in the broadcast booth and not knowing about the activity, which was kind of funny. You remember when we would get upset when they would call bands?
Oh, of course. And it's funny, that whole thing, because a lot of people now, some of the older guys from my generation don't like what's going on now, and they consider it more like band. Funny thing, when I was in high school, I wouldn't have been caught dead in my high school band. It was so different from drum corps. I couldn't do it. And then the mid 70s was when the whole thing started kind of cross-pollinating. People from drum corps were going back to their high schools and teaching. So they started taking on a drum corps persona more so. And matter of fact, nowadays, another thing that kind of changed the whole senior corps activity, you have a lot more people coming from band programs, from high school and college band programs, as opposed to back when we marched in the early 70s and stuff back then. Pretty much everybody that marched in senior corps came from a junior drum corps.
Yes.
So, but now coming from a band to a drum corps, in a lot of ways, you get that same indoctrination in your band before you go to drum corps. So it's not that big of a difference.
What nailed it for me was when the last time I talked to George Hopkins, when the cadets came to California, because they went to perform over at Pearl, and I got a chance to talk to him. He was really talking about woodwinds, and I asked him, "Why are you pushing woodwinds? What's the story behind that?" He goes, "Brian, it's harder. It's easier to get people who play different kinds of instruments to have them switch over than it is to teach someone from a brass to go and play a woodwind." I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. No wonder, because he's always looking at filling those spots, taking more members of those bands and putting them in the drum corps. Once he said that, it made total sense to me, and I was on board at that sense. Now, had I had not talked to him about it, I would be against it.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I wouldn't be too crazy about having woodwinds in drum corps, but I'd get over it if it's done well. Let's put it like that. Because that's kind of how I've been with most of the things that have changed over the years. There were some things I wasn't too crazy about, but the thing is, if it's done well, what am I going to complain about?
Right. It's like having trombones in. There's a lot of pieces where the trombones enhance it. Well, it made sense to see that. Would I want to see them on the field all the time? No. But how they created it, I thought it was pretty good. It worked because it had that sound. So that was one thing. But it was he was always looking at it. We need to have more people recruited to come in to fill those spots of people not coming back. But what he was really talking about was the membership dues. because not everybody could afford to keep coming back and paying that membership dues. That's really
right.
what it is.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that's something that's very different nowadays. Of course, compared to the times, like say back when you marched and everything, what it costs to participate. And to be honest, if I was a kid now, I don't know if I'd be able to do it.
I don't think I could have been able to do it.
Yeah.
Because I was fortunate because the New London Surface, and I remember, our director, Mike Brown, would always says, you're the only corps that doesn't have to pay to go on tour. What we did is we raised the money by doing bake sales, and then we had tag sales where we go in front of the convenience stores and shopping malls, and that's how we raised all of our money to go on.
Right. Yeah. Well, I tell you, the Caballeros have a world famous tag sale or tag day. They've had it ever since, and they're well known in the town, and they've always done very well with their tag day. But part of the problem is nowadays the old ways of raising money, like tag days. And I know when I first got into senior corps, or even in junior corps, they had the basket of cheer, that type of thing with like a raffle and stuff like that. It doesn't generate enough money. Drum corps has become very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, with the equipment and everything like that, it's just inflation and stuff, what it costs to travel. So, but
how did you meet your wife?
Well, actually, she was a member of the Sunrisers. Matter of fact, her father also marched in the Sunrisers. Her and a friend of hers was dating someone in Sky. And they had come down to a couple of rehearsals, whatever, and we got to talking, and we became friends, and it progressed from there.
When did she stop marching?
The last year she marched actually would have been 73.
What was her instrument, or what she?
Well, she was in the color guard.
Ah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you were in the world of fitness, you said too, huh?
What was that?
You were in the world of fitness also?
Yeah, I was into bodybuilding. That was my side thing. I always wanted to keep myself in shape. I wanted to live as well as I could for as long as I could. That was, I had someone tell me once when I was young, if you take care of yourself when you're young, it pays off when you get older.
True.
And I definitely found that to be true. I've gone through, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, I dealt with a severe case of psoriasis. I'm diabetic. I have high blood pressure, but maintaining my conditioning has helped me fight through a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, good for you.
So
what is it? 4 out of the 13 co-hosts, they're in the world of fitness. So we do a lot of stuff on that side also, which is good.
Oh, wow. Cool.
That's interesting.
Cool.
All right. So your last remarks, they got like 2 minutes. What would you say to get people to go and march in a drum corps? What would be your advice?
Well, my advice would be that it's something that's going to teach you how to give 100% all the time. It's going to teach you how to relate to other people in a lot of cases, and it may be the hardest thing you'll ever love.
That's so true. That's very, very true. All right, Frank, I got to end with that. I want to thank you so much for telling the stories. It was good to hear a lot of the stuff, especially out of the 60s going into the 70s, and how you made that transition of going to that junior corps into the senior corps, because I didn't know those stories. And a lot of people never get a chance to hear those stories, which is why I wanted to talk about When We March, because it's very interesting, and developing those lifelong friendships. That is truly the case.
Definitely.
That's one of the best things, unless you played like football or something like that. But still,
right.
It's a whole different world. Like I said, you could march until you're 86. And the reason why I always tell people outside of the activity that, because there were people who were holding the American flag who were in their 80s, and I never forgot.
That's right. That's right.
I would always go up and pay homage to them because I respected that.
Yeah. Like I say, you have great shared experiences. that nobody can take away from you.
Exactly. All right, man, I want to appreciate your time. So you get a chance. I hope you get a chance to see this show. This is Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, Women on TV.tv, IT247 out of Franklin, Tennessee. I want to thank Frank for coming on and talk about When He Marched. And if you see someone without a smile, please give them one of yours because the world needs it.